Hello everybody, welcome to Under Construction Live. My name is Dave Ryder. I'm a carpenter and professional woodworker. I had a project come into the shop here. I have a headboard and footboard and no rails. The customer would like me to fabricate rails, and what I needed was the hardware to do that. So I went online and looked around, and I found a set of bed rail hardware at Woodcrafters, and I'm going to put together a little video on how I went about installing that hardware. I found the hardware to be sturdy. Looks like it's going to be lasting a lifetime. There were a few comments on the Woodcrafter website about, there's no instructions on how to install it, and some people had concerns about, how strong it would be. So, here we go. Here we have a shot of the finished installation of the receiving part that goes on the bed frame. And you can see it's held in with 3 number 8 screws, which are not included in the package. And you can see that the mortises have been made. And that was one of the things that people were concerned about. There's a hook. There's a hook on the rail part that slides in and then locks like that, and it comes very close to the screws once installed. But I really found that there was no problem with that. You can see a patch here that I had to do. This is the old bed rail hardware. It's very big, stout cast iron. I'm assuming or thinking that this bed was probably early 1900s. Here I've taken the hardware out, and you can see the mortises for the ears on the rails, and you can also see that I had to make a patch here so that there was solid wood back behind the hardware, because this old hardware here was so big, and it was actually dovetailed in, so it made for a rather large patch on there. But the bed frame's going to be getting painted, so there was no real concern about having to match wood species. And I'll show you how I went about making that mortise for the patch. Here we have my router with a bushing here, and this collar rides around on the inside of the template, which I made here. I chose to use a collar that has a 3/4 inch OD and a 1/2 inch cutter. Little jig that I made here. This is, sometimes you got to make a tool to use a tool to get something done. And this is just a very simple way to do this. What I needed was a jig that I could use to mortise out to make my repair, and then I also wanted to use that same jig to be able to mortise out for the hardware. So what I chose to do was I had a scrap of 1/2 inch plywood, and I chose to make an opening that was about the same size as the bed rail frame. No particular reason, it didn't really matter. All I knew is that I didn't want to make 2 jigs. The simplest way that I found to make jigs for this type of application is to get yourself a piece of scrap wood. And what I did is, you know, someone might try to cut this opening out with a jigsaw, but it's very hard at that point to make it square and straight and parallel and all the things that you need. So what I do is I take my scrap of wood and I cut out the piece that I want to have for an opening. And I'll try to zoom in and see if you can see my saw mark here. But you can see that this has been run through the table saw, and I made it into 3 pieces. And then once I had those 3 pieces, I determined how big this opening was going to be, and I just cut that material out. And then simply glued it back together into one piece. And this way you have nice clean surfaces, you have square and parallel cuts on your fixture. Now on the back side, I found that once you go to try to install the fence, it's easier if you have a little saw kerf in there as a register mark. And then when I make my fence, I simply leave a little kerf on my piece so that it registers in that groove. And now I'm assured that my fence is parallel to the jig, and I know that the jig is parallel to itself and square. So once you have your large jig, then you can make small pieces that fit in like this. Now I can set my router in here and right along those pieces for the mortise that I needed for making the plug. So once that was done, I was able to take these pieces out, make new pieces, and they are snug. Make my new pieces and put those in. So now I have a new slot that I can use for making the mortise for the hardware. Now, as you can see, that slot's very close to the size of the collar, and occasionally you may nick the edge while you're putting it in or taking it out. And the great thing about building a jig like this is if you nick the edge, like I did here, but all you have to do is turn that around, and you have a fresh piece, you have a fresh surface to register off of. Alright, let's take a look at the hardware that we have here. It's constructed very well, but it is just stamped metal. And one of the problems that I saw, see if I can close up it here, is that the ends have, you know, just the stamped finish on it. And what I did, and I found that to be an irregularity, and it varied in width, especially right around this little stamp mark here. I took I went to my grinder and I just backgrounded flush so that when I was putting it in and out of the mortise it fit well. The other thing you'll notice is that there's about a 30 thousandths gap in between the two pieces when they're mated up. And you don't want to install it so that you have that gap, because the bed frame will wiggle. The ears on the rail hardware are tapered, so that when they slide into the slot, they draw the rail tight to the frame of the bed. If you don't take into account this this gap here, then even though the rails are seated in the mortise, they're not going to be tight to the frame, which is going to cause for a sloppy fit or a rocking bed. So what I chose to do on my installation is I set the hardware on the frame in about 30/1000ths of an inch. That's about a 32nd of an inch. And when I mortise the piece on the rail, I will leave that pretty much flush, if not just recessed just a hair, to assure that the connection is tight. Now, you can see that as the rail goes into the fixture, it drops down tight. Now, if it's too tight, it doesn't seat all the way, but I don't see that as a big problem, because I think you're more concerned with the bed rail being tight, and I think those adjustments can always be made better by either putting some shim stock back behind this plate to bring it forward, or reducing the amount that you might have it set in on your rail. So the other thing is, you know, you got to create this mortise in here, and I'll show you how I went about doing that. Now here's my mortise, and I just pulled the hardware out so you could get a look at it. But I'd like you to notice the patch that I made for doing my repair. I used my router with a 1/2 inch bit in it, and you can see that I have a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch radius here. Now I see a lot of people that will take their chisel and mortise that out square, and I guess that's a good way to do that. But you know, kind of being production and looking for ways to save a minute here or there, instead of taking the time to cut the mortise out, I found that it's easier for me, since I have the tooling, to simply make my patch, and then I use a router with a 1/4 inch radius roundover bit, and just take that corner off. Believe it or not, it's quicker than, you know, trying to cut these square. Plus, you know, you always like to have a radius so that it's not a place where something can start cracking at. If you make your mortises square, then that's a place where something's going to start to crack, or the possibility of it. I think it's just good practice to always keep radiuses. So here we have the hardware set in the mortise, and the next step is to, you know, we got to remove that material back behind the hardware where the ears of the rail hardware are going to go in. And the best way I found to do it is with a small chisel. Now this is only an 1/8 inch chisel, and it's a mortising chisel, and you may not have one in your collection, but you know, I find that this is very handy size chisel to have. And while you're at Woodcrafters, you might want to pick one up. Not that I'm trying to sell anything here. I'm just saying it would be a good addition to your tool collection. So what you do is you have your hardware in there, and you know, it's just like cutting a mortise. Just go in there and start chopping out the waste, removing it. I get it chopped out, and then I have a little vac here that I use to suck out what I can't pick out. One thing, a little caution, is remember, this is just an 1/8 inch chisel, and you don't want to be prying, and you know, like if you had a 1/2 inch mortising chisel that you're using, this is a relatively delicate tool, and you don't want to be bending it and breaking it. Alright, I've got it chopped out, the mortise for the ears on the bed rail hardware. And what I did is I set my little square here for the depth of the ears, and then I added about a 32nd of an inch. And what this is for is so that I can double check and make sure that I have all the clearance in the mortise that I need. And a little trick is to take your pencil and put some lead on the bottom side of your square, and then when you push it down in the hole, if you have any high spots in there, it'll leave a little smudge mark, and you can take your chisel and clear that out then. Okay, so the next step is to remove the hardware, and we have to increase the size of the mortise now. And this is where some people were concerned about the screws, because once that drops in the hole, then it has to slide down like that. And you can see that there's very little clearance here. What I'm going to do first, before I take that out of there, now that I'm thinking about it, is I'm going to pre-drill my screw holes, and I'm going to screw the screw in there. That way there's full wood around the hole, and the force of the screw going in will not crack the wood had I mortised it first and then put the screw in. Alright, so I made my center drill holes with the self-centering drill bit, which is another good tool to have. It really saves a lot of time and gives you exact holes. Now, here's the screw I'm using. It's a number 8 drywall screw. It's a laminating drywall screw, so it's got a heavy body on it. Now, I use the dial indicators, and I check the size of the screw shank, and you can see that it's about 135 thousandths. Now, the wood that I'm going into is birch. You can tell that by these little flecks. Come on. These little flecks here, those are very characteristic of birch. And I don't know, this side over here, you know, it may be birch. It might even be maple is what I'm really thinking it is. But it doesn't really matter. They're both very hard woods. So I found my drill bits, and you want a drill bit that's going to be just a little, where am I? Just a little bit bigger than what the screw shank diameter is. If it was softwood, poplar, pine, something like that, you could go a little bigger so that you have more interference. Now, here's another thought on these screws is, it's the screw itself is holding the hardware in, and it's holding it tight against the wood surface. It's not, yes, it's holding the bed together, but the actual strength of this whole thing comes from the mortise of the hardware being mortised into the bed. Most of the pressure is going to be on the frame pushing down, and with a nice tight mortise here, that is not going to move. The screws are going to hold the fixtures in place and stop that from pulling out, but there's not really any shear pressures involved on the screws themselves, because all the pressure is going to be taken up by the mortise. Now, it may be a different story on the rail itself, especially since the rail doesn't have as big of shoulders for the mortise to sit into. It's a good idea, though, to make sure all your mortises are tight, but I would not be relying on the screws to hold everything together. Okay, so I've got my screws in, and I got them torqued down to where I'm going to want to put them. I don't want to be stressing the wood out after I mortise the material out from around them. Okay, so this is what it looks like with the plate off, and you can see that this allows the mortise allows the rail frame to drop in, but now it has to drop down. And here's what some of the people were concerned about, is that this ear gets very close to the screw hole there. Let's see if we can. There's only about 1/8 of an inch. But it doesn't really matter, because, you got to do what you got to do. So, I know that the measurement on this ear is about, 3/8 of an inch. So, it's just a simple matter of measuring from that edge there, which is that mortise there, is this mortise here is this edge here. I know that my ear is 3/8 of an inch longer, so it's just a matter of measuring from there to there 3/8 of an inch or thereabouts on both holes. And then taking your chisel and chopping out that mortise to complete the clearance that you need. Now, my holes are drilled. They've already been screwed and torqued down. So I want to be careful that I try to chop closely, and that when I'm chopping in that area, I'm always cutting away from that hole, because this wood here is rather fragile, but the screw's long enough that it's much, this mortise is 3/8 of an inch deep, and my screws are 1.5 inches. So that screw is penetrating the wood much deeper than what the mortise is. So I'll finish cutting that mortise. Okay, I've completed my mortise cuts and checked them for depth and size, and everything's ready to go. It's ready to put the plate back on. And you can see that I did get pretty close to that hole there. And I just wanted to point out that I also made a little bit of a relief chisel cut here on the back of the hardware, or the fixture, or the mortise, so that because I chose to recess this piece here, when this drops in tight, it's actually dropping below the surface a hair, and it just makes it easier to for this piece to come out without the chance of scoring or scratching or breaking the wood right here. All right, on to the next step. Okay, here's the completed install of the hardware. And in review, or for those that are just looking at this to see if they want to do it, some of the things to think about, things that I've done, is one, you're going to need some screws. You need about 24 screws to complete the project. Some of the things that I did was I prepared the hardware. What I mean by that is that I used a grinder, but you could certainly use a file to get rid of these stamping marks here. I put a little bit of a back bevel on my pieces. I put the piece in a drill press and enlarged the size of the hole so that the screw head would be flat in the hole when it goes through. Probably not necessary because you do have that 30 thousandths clearance in between the pieces. Some of the necessary tools that you need is, well, you need some chisels. It helps if you have a 1/8 inch chisel, but you could remove that waste also with a 1/8 inch drill bit and then clean it up with a chisel and some other kind of cutting tool. It wouldn't be that hard to, really, I hate to say it, but you could use a little screwdriver or form a tool out of a nail or something like that to cut that out. Certainly a router and a collet, and making a template to do that work will give you much more accurate work. But once again, this could all be done with just a chisel. Obviously a drill would help. And my next step is to fabricate the bed rails, and I'll be making those out of a piece of 3/4 inch plywood and a piece of 1/2 inch plywood laminated together. And I chose to do that instead of using solid wood because I feel the plywood will be stronger than the wood itself. So my next video will be working on the bed rails. Goodbye, everybody.